what's one tool, pattern, library, something that you like that you think devs should check out, can learn from, would find interesting?
I just always read other people's contracts to see how they do stuff. And so I'm always like, anytime I hit a problem, I'm always like, oh, like Uniswap did this, or how did Open do this, or just like knowing the paradigms of other people. I think that solidity is like kind of like chess or something, in a way of like, it's important to like know the important pitches, like how the game is played and what are the openings.
On this episode, we talked with Wilson Cusack, who is an engineer at Coinbase working on Base. Kevin, what stood out to you about this conversation?
Yeah, it was neat to hear all of the different projects that he's worked on. He definitely has developed this understanding of knowing when to be clever and to do a lot of research and understand game theory, and then knowing when it's just time to ship. And he's done a lot of both, and so it was really neat to hear his perspective on it. What about you?
Yeah, I think he did a really great job sort of demonstrating how you can borrow contract design patterns and protocol design patterns from something like DeFi and apply it in like the NFT space, for example, which was fun. And then he also talked about how Solidity is like chess. So there are a lot of really good little tidbits in this conversation with Wilson. And yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed as much as we enjoyed recording it. We are here with Wilson Cusack, who is an engineer at Coinbase working on Base. Wilson, very excited to have you on the pod.
Excited to be here.
Maybe before we get into all of the things that you've been working on in the space, you can give a little bit of context on you and how you got into crypto.
I think I first heard about Bitcoin in like 2013, when there was like one of the Bitcoin pumps. And so I wrote a paper about it then, and was fairly interested in it. I was kind of like interested in sort of libertarian economic ideas. And then my senior year of college, the 21 computer came out. It was this precursor to understanding like a virtual machine. It was a local machine, a local Bitcoin machine. So the idea was that you could like build apps that worked really well with Bitcoin. The Bitcoin computer was like, it had like a tiny mining chip in it. It was supposed to be optimized for mining. And then like you worked with other 21 computer holders as like a network. And you could say like, dot mine, and you would just get like a little stream of BTC as like your reward for participating in the network. And you could sort of like only call that so frequently. So it was this sort of idea that like you could use this for micropayments, but the 21 computer stuff sort of died because it became infeasible with Bitcoin network fees. Like to have sort of like apps reliant on micropayments didn't make a lot of sense. And it was sort of this grappling for like, what is actually going to be built with this? And a lot of those things were precursors to understanding, I think, Ethereum and things that could be built with Ethereum. Because instead of a virtual machine, you had these like local machines, and you were sort of still trying to build apps that sort of had like some known execution. I think the virtual machine ended up being the better model, but that was an interesting place to like sort of start to get some footing and like, yeah, thinking about crypto and decentralization and like what makes those kind of apps work and some of those ideas. So my senior year, I was working on a commodity exchange, like a SMS based commodity exchange was like my senior thesis in school. And this was also when the Bitcoin computer came out. And so I went to Ghana in January 2016 to pilot this like thing I had built. And I like brought the 21 computer with me. I was like, I'm gonna like find a way to use this as like part of the thing. I didn't find a way to use it. I ended up starting this company out of college, like got a Gates Foundation grant, then did YC, etc. I was running this company. We did YC in 2017, and it was the same time as I was like watching crypto take off. And so I was refreshing my GDAX, watching my net worth go up and down while I'm like trading corn in Ghana. And so I was very interested in a lot of the game theory that had been developed. We had this network of people who could sort of like mint like virtual maize credits, corn credits, like on our platform. So somebody would come and like drop off their corn, and they would get like a corn credit on their phone, and they could trade that for like a fiat credit, and then they could cash that fiat credit out. So it had all these crypto analogies, and I wanted to sort of like convert our finance stack to running more on crypto. But it was just the case of like, in hindsight, it was just like way too early to try to do that. That was like 2018 that we were trying to do that. And it was just like network fees alone would just make it totally infeasible. And there just weren't on and off ramps in like Ghana or anywhere in Africa. So we ran that company for a couple of years, ended up shutting that company down in 2019. And at first I was like, oh, I'm going to like take some of these same ideas to like the US and wanted to make an eBay or Craigslist competitor in this model of like CDP, sort of like you like lock up some money and so you don't have to do it based on social trust. So that was beginning of 2019. And I was like, you know what? Like maybe I've just drank way too much Kool-Aid. I need to like take a break from this crypto stuff. And so took a break. I got an iOS development, made like an app for parents to track stuff they do with their kids. But like a year later, I didn't really like want to turn that company into a startup. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And like crypto was one of the few things that was still exciting to me, even like after a year away. One of my brothers was at Coinbase and there was an opportunity on the Coinbase crypto team. And so I joined Coinbase in May 2020.
And now it's on-chain summer. This is why I think some of the stuff with Base will be interesting to dive into, because it feels like as we get to the point where, like with the Bitcoin computer stuff, for example, or even with why you couldn't use, a blockchain as a backend for some of the stuff you're doing with the commodities, it feels like as we start to take away some of these friction points and make fees lower and just make these things more accessible, hopefully we'll figure out what the hell is going on with this and it will actually get to a point where we're like, oh, we do know what's happening.
When like the internet came and people were like, well, you could upload the newspaper there. That's not going to be the biggest thing. The biggest things are these like emergent phenomena. And so like when people are like, what is it good for? I'm just like, I don't feel compelled to answer that question. Like people show up again and again to use this. And I'm not going to say that like those people are stupid or wrong. Like there's some reason that people like showing up to do these things.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, I'm curious, like we'll get into what you've built across the ecosystem with Backed and Papr and then also in the Nouns ecosystem. But when you think about that from the perspective of you as a developer, I'm curious how you think about building things that are actually fun. Because I feel like there's something appealing about, over engineering and kind of doing like the intellectualizing of these protocols. But
Yeah.
ultimately, like it is just what is going to be fun for people to use.
I think the most fun I had in crypto is sort of these just like random projects that I spun up. So like, I like released my first Solidity thing in like beginning of 2021, which is this app called like Commune, DIY socialism. You like pay in money and it like splits it equally among all members. So you could prove you're a socialist. Sort of you could make your own commune. And so that was the very first thing I made. But then I started working on this NFT loan product and I had these tickets for the borrower and lender that were NFTs themselves, but didn't have any images. And right around when I finished this, Uniswap v3 came out. And Uniswap v3 had these, NFTs, on-chain NFTs as images. And I was like, oh, that's sick. Like, I want to do that. And so I figured out how to make these like loan cards, these loan tickets. That took a lot of work and was really complex. And this project that I had started was sort of like making its way into Coinbase. But I had an NFT idea. You had an NFT that was like a grid of squares, and each address that you transferred it to added a square. And the color of that address was determined by the address that you transferred it to. And so, I like made this in like 2 nights. And then I was like, oh, I don't want to like wait till next week to like announce this. And so it's like kind of like broken, but I like put up a super janky site, sort of had this like Tom Sachs vibe. I had like handwritten the letters of like, it just had like a mid button and the cost and didn't say anything else. And I like put it up and I was like, oh, like I see some stuff that's broken in the contract. Like I'll fix it tomorrow. And I wake up and like, it's made like $40,000 because the price was like doubling each time. And then it like, it mints out within like 18 hours. The NFT craze was just kicking off and I hadn't really tapped into how crazy it was, but I had sort of like gotten taken in this current and like being in that Discord was an interesting experience because I realized like, oh, this is just like about like community and fun. Like these people just like want to be online and they want something that's like a less arbitrary Reddit or whatever. Like it costs something to be here. Like you have to have bought this NFT. And so you sort of like, you paid something to opt in. It means something. You sort of also made some like aesthetic alignment. And then, yeah, there's like some like gambling factor or whatever. But I was like, oh, this is just like community. Like people are just here to like meet, spend time online, and that like Discord was actually a really good vibe for a while. Like it was just like really fun, good people there. I still like spot people doing other stuff in crypto now that were in that Discord. Um, so I've had a lot of NFTs that were sort of like these like fever projects that were done really quickly. Um, we ended up doing like a follow on to that one, which is like this animal coloring book, which was similar. Like you transferred it to your friends to color it in, but you were coloring in an image instead of just like adding blocks. But the short end to that long answer is to say that I think that's always the stuff I've had the most fun with in crypto. And it's just like playing with this new medium.
I'm curious on that note, it sounds like that was a project where you just sort of had, like, a two-day period where you just hammered it out and shipped it. I'm
Yeah.
curious how you think about balancing, especially on, like, this consumer experimental side, just, like, shipping stuff and being like, "Whatever, we'll see what happens," versus being more diligent about your contracts and, like, making sure that everything is working the way that you expect and all that kinda stuff.
Every contract I've shipped that hasn't had an audit has had a bug in it. So some of those bugs are known and some of them are not known to others, but they're yes, there's bugs in basically all of them. That first one had like a very bad bug that made it like really confusing. Oh, every person in the transfer chain should get like a copy. So like we're all making this image together and like every time you get a copy along the way. But the problem was that like the copies also made copies when they got transferred. And so it was this like virus, and so people were, like, selling the copies of the copies, and I was, like, on Twitter for 3 days trying to be like, "That's a copy of a copy." Like, it was a mess. But I think, though, that the advantage of, like, the fun NFT stuff is that it's, like, okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to, like, ship fast because it doesn't matter that much, and that's why it's a lot harder to develop in the DeFi space because you only get, like, so many product iterations in, like a 2-year period because you have to go through the full audit cycle and you really have to like think about how you want to spend that time.
Yeah, it sounds like you've gone across the spectrum of the like totally do this just for fun, like cool, there's a bug now, it's spreading even faster, like this is exciting, to like writing contracts that are more like financially meaningful. So could you talk a little bit about Papr and what you had done at Backed, and sort of how this goes to the other end of that spectrum?
Like, when I first had the idea, um, it was like, okay, what if you could get a loan against your NFT and like how should it work? Okay, well, borrower sets like the mid and max, like the parameters, the minimum amount I want, the max interest I'm willing to pay, the minimum duration I want. And like the loan starts, but the borrower might have like mispriced their item. And so the idea was like, well, what if anyone could sort of like any new lender could buy out the existing lender by improving one of those terms? So uh I think I was the first one to sort of suggest that, and like that ended up getting adopted into a lot of protocols. But when it was like a year between when I first suggested it or started working on it and it like actually launched because it sort of like went in Coinbase and then came out of Coinbase. We like launched, a team of us left Coinbase and we're funded by Coinbase Ventures. And so, but in between that time, there were like a dozen other platforms that launched that were doing basically the exact same thing, like the peer-to-peer NFT. And I sort of knew even when we were launching it, like this isn't really the winning solution. We're gonna have to work on a V2. And so this idea of like lender vaults, like, okay, you have this peer-to-peer thing, but like there's probably some alignment of lenders. Like you want to lend to punks, I want to lend to punks. Can we sort of like get everybody in a group together to lend to punks? Something has to give in your parameterization problem because the way we were doing it, we wanted sort of Oracle free loans. And if you have an Oracle free loan, you don't know the payoff until the loan is due, like until the very last minute. And so if we're all together, like we create this like punk lending strategy, there's 100 of us and like 3 of us have our money going to the first loan and like 5 of us have our money going to the second loan. It starts to feel like this like crazy skeuomorphic accounting thing where you have to like keep everybody's money locked until like the loan expires. And like, if you don't keep people's money locked, then they can sort of like arbitrage the vault. Like I see like, oh, I see this punk loan's about to go bad and I like hop out at a better share price or whatever. So we kind of got, stuck on that for a while. And Yeah, I was, we were pretty close to launching something that I wasn't very happy with, and I was kind of depressed about it, and just felt like we couldn't figure it out. And then we sort of had this idea that started from um Squeeth. Actually, I'd sort of gotten very interested in Squeeth from Open, and Squeeth is a power perpetual. It tracks ETH squared, um, and so it's sort of an on-chain perpetual. And I think like the miracle of Squeeze is this sort of like is that it trades at the price it's supposed to. So um with basically you have with Squeeze this uh, you know index like the target price that it's supposed to trade at, which is a pure ETH squared, and then you have like what it's actually trading at. And whether it trades above that or below that sort of indicates the funding rate. So if ETH squared is like trading, if it's trading above, if it's trading above a pure ETH squared, that suggests people are like paying a premium for it. They're buying it at a premium. And if it's trading below, that suggests like there's some discount. And so uh the clever thing that Squeak did is it said like rather than like actually paying out this premium. So like you want to hold ETH squared, I'm selling it to you, and I want like a premium for selling it. We can talk about how it gets created in a minute. Rather than saying like, okay, like every 24 hours, like let's settle our books, or like when you pull out, like the accounting could get really crazy. And so what they actually said is like, we're just gonna adjust the target of what Squeeth is supposed to trade at. So like at the first minute, it's supposed to trade at exactly like perfectly ETH squared. But at that like minute or the next time somebody touches the contract, it assesses like, is it above or below what it's supposed to be? And based on that, it charges one party or the other. So the charge is if it's trading above, that's saying buyers are paying a premium for holding this. So we're going to now track ETH squared minus that discount. So basically, if you as are a buyer, it's sort of like a hot potato. Like the longer you hold ETH squared, the more and more it's decaying against a pure ETH squared that's charging you for you basically holding this. And what that means as a seller, the way that ETH Squeeth gets created, I deposit ETH and I can create Squeeth, and I sort of have a collateralization ratio. Well, as that decays in value, basically like my collateral, my ETH becomes more valuable relative to this Squeeth that I created. So I can take some of that ETH out, or I can mint more Squeeth, and that's the payment to me as a Squeeth short, as a Squeeth seller. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yeah, let me try and play that back. So it sounds like it is attempting to target ETH squared, and as it deviates from it, instead of making ultra complicated math for everybody, it like as it takes the deviation amount, and like the holder of the Squeeth bears that risk, and then the like collateralization ratio will change based on whether it's sort of like gone up or down.
Like the amazing thing is that it trades where it's supposed to. So you can think of like, here's
Yeah.
how it's actually trading in the market, and here's the target. And the target is always pulling it up or down. And it's doing that by like trying to charge people or sort of like pay someone else, charge someone and pay someone else. So like again, it's trading at like 1.1, and it's supposed to be trading at 1. And they're like, okay, and that means there's like more demand from buyers and sellers. So like let's charge buyers a little bit and let's pay sellers a little bit. So now like you had 5 ETH in here, and before you could mint 5 Squeeth, and now you have 5 ETH in here, and you can mint 5.1 Squeeth. And so that's trying to pull the price of this down, and to sort of like charge people in the market and reward the sellers. And so
I
how that gets
see.
actually affected is, well, if you can now mint more Squeeth in your vaults, you're creating more supply in the market. And so you can go on Uniswap and you sell it, and that creates sell pressure. And the buyers aren't happy because they're getting charged for holding this, and that sell pressure is pushing their price down. And so maybe they're going to sell it too, which creates more sell pressure. So the sort of miracle of Squeeth is that like it actually trades how it's supposed to. Like it's actually tracking ETH squared plus this decay instead of trading at like some random, it can trade at any price. And so the fact that it's actually these mechanics, like this very subtle microeconomics is working, was really significant in believing that Papr could work. And we haven't even gotten to Papr.
Yeah, so let's bring this back to Papr.
Again, there's always like a lot of different ways to explain something like directionally. But how it sort of started for me was like JPEG exists. And JPEG had this. Are you guys familiar with JPEG? They're like another NFT lending protocol. But basically, they have their own sort of stable coin. They're more of like a maker DAO model where their like interest rate are sort of like fixed by the DAO. And so you deposit a punk and you get their stable coin, which is like PUSD. And then you can like sell their stable coin and you get USDC and that's sort of your loan. And when you come back, you have to pay back more than you took out as interest. And I thought, well, like that's pretty cool. It's just sort of this awesome growth hack where like you don't even need lenders because you just invented your own stable coin that you're giving to the borrowers and you just sort of like need people to trade the market. But I thought the bummer is that the returns are going to the DAO. It's hard to participate as like a lender in this market. Like I can sort of like put liquidity in like the curve pool, but I can't really participate as a lender. And so I was like, oh, well, what if the interest payments were in kind? So rather than paying back more PUSD than you took, you're paying back the exact same amount, but the value of the what you took is supposed to get higher. And that's how it sort of relates to Squeeth, because I was like, oh, Squeeth already has this model of in-kind interest payments, where instead of, paying back more Squeeth than you took, like the value of your Squeeth is changing. But it's different than Squeeth because Squeeth, people are paying a premium to hold it. Whereas with a loan, we expect people to pay a premium to sell it. I have an NFT. I want liquidity. So I'm paying you to hold this token. So the way Papr works is you come and deposit one of these NFTs that was allow listed, and you would get Papr meme out. And then you would sell this Papr meme to a buyer in exchange for USDC. And this buyer was holding the Papr meme, anticipating that the mechanics of this would force Papr meme to be more valuable over time. And you as the borrower, the interest on your loan is just the difference between the price you sold it at and the price you repurchase it at later. You pay back the exact same amount of Papr that you took. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so to differentiate, it sounds like the first model was like increasing the amount of the token that you needed to purchase back. Now the amount is flat, but the value of that token changes. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So JPEG sort of had this model that like MakerDAO, and yeah, this was an idea of like how can you do sort of in-kind interest payments. It actually has, I think, a lot of interesting applications for ERC. It has a really interesting reflexivity. So again, one of the insights behind this was like you don't want a case where somebody's arbing your protocol of like everybody knows this loan's about to go bad, but the protocol doesn't know because the protocol is stupid. And like if there were share prices on Uniswap, they would be trading entirely different really than the share prices in your protocol. So one idea was like, let's just make like the Uniswap trading price of the shares the actual oracle. So the borrower comes to our contracts, they mint Papr meme, they take it to Uniswap, they sell it for USDC. The contract then watches how Papr meme is trading on Uniswap to determine interest rates. So let's say like the loans are going really bad. It looks like the protocol's unhealthy. Like lenders are dumping Papr meme, and the lower that Papr meme goes in price relative to where the contract thinks it should be. Again, like Squeeth, the contract has like a way that's trying to pull it. So the contract is like, hey, like so far borrowers and lenders have been matched here. I think like that means like this is the value of Papr, but it's like trading way down here. And so the contract is like, oh, something's wrong. And it basically charges interest proportionally to how far that's trading off of target. And so if you have loans that go bad, now all of a sudden interest rates go up, loan durations get shorter. It sort of has this like cybernetic quality to it where it's responsive to the market and in sort of correctly recalibrating It's signaling increased risk via these increased interest rates. Um, the other interesting thing about this is that it's robust to liquidation shortfall. So, and this sort of became a big talking point for us is like most of the protocols for pooled lending are built around like the Aave compound model where the accounting sort of doesn't work if there's a liquidation shortfall. Like it banks on being able to liquidate somebody's collateral and pay back the debt that they're owed because it pays interest out like block by block. And if they didn't have enough money, then like sort of the last person to come and get their money out would not have enough. The accounting would break. But with this model, the payment is just in kind. It's through the trading price of the token. So if there's a liquidation that shortfalls, somebody borrowed 80 paper meme and is only able to pay back 70 paper meme, nothing is broken. Like everybody's still holding the same amount of paper meme. Maybe paper meme starts to trade down in the market. And then again, as I just talked about, then like interest rates go up and there's sort of this responsiveness to it. But it has a robustness that is interesting.
Okay, so it sounds like there's this like auto balancing mechanism um, that you borrowed from previous projects, and you applied that to the like NFT loan ecosystem. And this, I mean, overall, like, uh, what would you say that you took away from building this, and like, what did you learn? What were some of the aha moments that you got as you built this out?
We released the white paper and that was sort of satisfying. You know, we got like a good response from people. I think people were intrigued with the model. Um, and yeah, that was exciting. We launched Paper Meme and the main goal was to like make it way less friction to get a loan. You know, you shouldn't have to like come and see what lenders want and like this whole peer-to-peer thing. And then it's like a 30-day loan and you come back 30 days and you know, it had no expiry. You could do like instant loans. It could do long tail assets. And so it sort of checked a lot of the boxes that we wanted to check, but it still was the case that, I mean, you like, it's always difficult. I don't think that paper meme succeeded, and it's always difficult to learn a lesson from failure because failure is sort of like the highest entropy state. You know, it's very low signal. And so it's tempting to learn the wrong lesson. So there's market timing things, you know, like a lot of people were like, hey, this is like sick, but I don't want to loan against my NFTs. There were, you know, towards the end, liquidity things. You know, Blur launched their own marketplace and was sort of like doing liquidity rewards for people doing it. And so it's like, is there actually demand for this, or are people just like getting paid to take loans? Uh, and to me, that wasn't really that motivating to compete with. Like, I didn't really just want to like do liquidity mining and like, I didn't want to make it succeed at all costs. And yeah, there was all these questions of like, well, you could, you know, you could change the parameters, you could do it with blue chip, you could do like there was a bunch of different ways to spin it, but towards the end, we weren't really able to move the needle on adoption. We were like, oh, maybe adding all these collections will move the needle. Didn't really move the needle. Oh, like people want a simpler interface. Is that going to move the needle? Didn't really move the needle. Um, and so we were sort of looking forward. We actually had like plenty of money left, plenty of months left to keep experimenting, but it was sort of like decreasing confidence that the world is actually responding to our hypotheses. Like so far, the hypotheses we've had of like, if we change this, this will lead to more adoption wasn't really panning out. And I wasn't really willing to say like, this must succeed at all costs. And we're going to do like liquidity mining and all this sort of stuff. Um, so it was this mix of like it was actually miraculous to me that again, the microeconomics worked. Like it sort of traded in a very reasonable range. It traded like where it should. Like people were responsive to these signals. And so that was cool. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I think like a lot of, you know, people who are interested in like protocol design and stuff were into it. And like we had a lot of interesting conversations. It was built on Uniswap. So like that was a whole interesting thing about it. Um so yeah, those things were satisfying, but I think yeah, it was very tough to crack user adoption to the degree that we needed to.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of I think the protocol design there is really fun to geek out on, and I also think it's interesting that it was built using Uniswap and leveraging a bunch of existing sort of on-chain um, infrastructure. In that sort of regard, I'm curious how you think about what basically how that shaped your approach. Because I think in the context of a lot of this, there's like friend tech, which is like we're going to build everything on our own. Like we're not going to use existing,
Yeah.
ecosystem contracts. We're going to just like own this entire stack. And then there's the approach of being like, we're gonna leverage composability and really use these mechanics to our advantage. And so I'm curious how you thought about that. Obviously, this was like much more on the composable side of things. Um, yeah, I'm curious what that was like.
Yeah, we thought about like doing embedding our own AMM early on. It was just like if we can just if somebody else has solved this problem, like let's just use that. And if this is like wildly successful, we can like think about adapting it and optimizing it later. It went from like I had the very first idea for it end of July and it went to audit in December. And so it was a pretty quick cycle from like not having any idea how any of it would work to figuring it all out. And so yeah, we were mainly focused on like speed to market. And so anything that wasn't like absolutely critical, I think like Friend Tech probably made the right trade off, right? Like it's pretty critical that they like get a fee from those trades to be able to keep going. And it doesn't really matter that much if it's on Uniswap.
Yeah, totally.
It'll sort of depend on the product that you're building. I imagine, like in your case, to build out your own AMM wouldn't give you the same sort of like benefit that Friend Tech would get from building to the specification that they want. Like you just needed a general AMM. How would you say though that like aside from, taking and composing off of Uniswap, how did you push the boundaries of like the NFT loaning space, or like what was like one nice takeaway that you got as you completed the project?
Yeah. Well, yeah. First on that point, it was like the most magic experience I've had in crypto of just like permissionless integration of like the very first time that I tried to get this working and then I like clicked on Uniswap and like the pool was there and I could like add pool and it just like worked back and forth. That was very, very cool. And it was also cool when we launched. There were just like tons of people that aped in because like there's just people that are watching Uniswap and looking for new tokens. Um, yeah, I think the thing I was interested in at the end was actually more like the ERC20 side. Like part of the thing I didn't like is that it had this curatorial nature of like it required some like allow list of like, oh, these are like the meme-ish NFTs and sort of like a curation of that allow list. I was interested in something where you could basically just make a lending pool for any two tokens. Like you could make like a Papr ETH DAI, and that would be like deposit ETH and borrow DAI, or Papr DAI ETH and deposit DAI and borrow ETH. And then they would just be like siloed and in their own pools. And like if you could just bake in like certain parameterizations, then people could sort of like just like do your own research and wouldn't require as much overhead. Um, so yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes. Uh, I think it's a really cool model for like lending that's robust to liquidation shortfall, which allows like the pooled model to work for a lot more long tail assets. Obviously, there's now like Ajna and some more like Oracle list stuff happening. I'm not entirely aligned on like the Oracle free model because if the idea is like, oh, like bring your own Oracle, well, like users want a simple experience, so it's just going to centralize at the periphery now on like some Oracle somebody picks at the periphery, and if you can like pick the right Oracle at the core and bake in the right protections, is that possibly a better solution? So I think, yeah, the Oracle list is an interesting contrast. I'm excited to see. It seems like it's doing well super far. I haven't kept super close track. But yeah, I think it's an interesting Papr is like an interesting model for gaining robustness, gaining like it's also like responsive. There's no governance for like setting interest rates and stuff. The interest rate is just dynamic based on the sort of the funding rates in the market. So yeah, those are sort of the things I was most proud of and hope to see continue.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it feels like so there's that side of things that you've worked on. On the flip side, you have like your work in the nouns ecosystem, which is very much like, you know, you're plugging into an existing set of infrastructure. In this case, the infrastructure, air quotes, is nouns itself.
Yeah,
And I guess the meme and the governance. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about how you started getting involved in the noun side of things.
I got more interested in it over time as like it seemed like the governance was clearly functioning. And that's sort of one of the things that made me interested in it is it felt like one of the few like true and honest DAOs. A lot of DAOs I don't understand why they exist. And they also are sort of shrouded by like these opaque processes of, you get the sense that like the important decisions are sort of made behind closed doors, and there's a small people controlling this at the end of the day. But Noun sort of had this fair start element of just like there were no pre-allocations. It was just like sold out. And it had this legibility that like the proposals are there, people vote on the proposals, and like that things get funded or funded. I think participating in Ethereum as a whole, I think has made me more optimistic about our ability to like coordinate effectively. And I think that Nouns is like an interesting alternative to like, giving your kids nouns versus giving your kids Bitcoin, right? Like Bitcoin is sort of often this like fear-based, like use this in the apocalypse. Whereas nouns is sort of this aspirational idea that like this permissionless organization can function to positive ends. So yeah, I finally ended up, devs did something, prices came down. I finally ended up buying one in December. And yeah, I was highly interested in the governance and particularly like getting people to vote with reason. And so I ended up building a tool in voter.wtf, which was basically just like what I wanted. It was a feed of like all the votes across all the groups. It ended up evolving into more. But yeah, I was basically just making something that was to use. I actually asked like many other governance clients to build all those features for months before, and they didn't. So I just did it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think like dropping into an ecosystem and contributing is something that many devs have aspirations for, but maybe don't always end up doing it or aren't sure where to start. Can you talk a little bit about how you navigated that with DAOs, like where you knew you wanted to do this? And then you had also built Noun 4, which is like
Oh
fractionalizing
yeah.
nouns. Maybe first talk about what that is, and then maybe just as a whole, like how did you jump into this?
The idea was just like fractionalizing a noun into like the glasses, the body, and the head. And I never ended up shipping that live, but it was sort of this idea of like, I wanted a more opinionated fractionalization. I felt like the fractionalization tools were sort of these like blunt instruments, and I wanted something that was like tailor-made for this project. That you were literally getting these pieces of it, but also focused like possibly at buying something with people you were aligned with so that you could like vote together, as opposed to just like buying with randoms and then like fighting how to vote.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that real quick, do you like design your contracts with any level of like modularity to account for that type of iterative approach, or is it just like ship them and see what happens type of thing?
Being too clever is generally the enemy. It just like, I just keep it as simple as I possibly can. I mean, unless it's for like backed, obviously, then if you're shipping a
Yeah.
multi-month project, you're like thinking a lot about some of those things, and they really do come back to bite you of like, oh, like if we had just abstracted this thing a little bit more, that would have worked a lot better. So those things do really matter, but no, I tend not to think about them because everything's just downstream of like, does anybody even care at all?
So what I'm hearing is like, don't overthink it. Just get your hands dirty, go play around.
Okay, two follow-up questions before we wrap. One, for someone who's listening to this and is like, yeah, I do have a project in the back of my head that I kind of know I should build, but I'm like scared to do it or I'm worried about having, people on crypto Twitter like destroy me or whatever. What piece of advice would you give them?
Use ChatGPT. I use ChatGPT for voter.wtf. I just try to get a little bit working. It's like seeing is believing. Just see if you can get the code to show up on the page. It's like the hello world. Can you get the contract? Can you get the first thing working? And then I feel like the process usually pulls you along. Yeah, I think different people are motivated differently by sharing. Like some people like are helped by like sharing their plans for accountability, and some people like get too much satisfaction from sharing their plans and they never actually do the things. So just ship it. Like if you have it and it's like half done, like that was the story of my contract that sold out. I was like, oh, I could wait like another week to fix all this stuff, or I could just like ship it today. And I probably would have never shipped it if I had waited another week. And so if you have something that's shippable, just ship it. And if you don't think it's shippable, it probably is actually.
Yeah. Okay, last final question. What's one tool, pattern, library, something that you like that you think devs should check out, can learn from, would find interesting? It's shill time, basically.
I just always read other people's contracts to see how they do. And so I'm always like, anytime I hit a problem, I'm always like, oh, like Uniswap did this, or how did Open do this, or just like knowing the paradigms of other people. I think that Solidity is like kind of like chess or something, in a way of like, it's important to like know the important pitches, like how the game is played and what are the openings. And I love Forge and Foundry a lot. Georgios sort of told me on that pretty early on. I helped a little bit with the dev there and like writing some tutorials and stuff for that. So I'm a big fan of that. But apart from that, I don't think I really use any special tools or anything.
I like the chess analogy. It's a really good one. Wilson, this was so wonderful to have you on and to chat. Where can people learn more about you and all of the things that you're incrementally and hopefully constantly shipping?
I'm just constantly tweeting stupid shit. Wilson at Wilson Cusack at Twitter. And then I'm on GitHub too, mostly focused on base and like on-chain summer stuff right now. So you can watch me ship like 1 million fixes to our website every day.
Love to see it.